Welcome to AI for Good, the leading, action-oriented, global and inclusive United Nations platform on AI. Organized by the International Telecommunication Union, the United Nations Agency for Digital Technologies, in partnership with 50+ UN sister organizations and co-convened with Switzerland. The goal of AI for Good is to unlock AI's potential to serve humanity. In today's AI for Good event, we are counting on you to use the live video wall feature to ask questions and post comments to help create an engaging discussion. We encourage you to stay until the end to chat, connect, ask questions, and network with our distinguished facilitators and world-class AI experts in the neural network. It is now time to kick off the session and welcome our first speaker. The floor is yours.
Yes, hello everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome the real Serge Belongie. He is currently professor of computer science at the University of Copenhagen, where he is also the head of the Danish Pioneer Center for Artificial Intelligence. Briefly, he's American and received his PhD from Berkeley, and then he went to other very nice institutions, San Diego, University of California, and then became the professor and then became further professor at Cornell Tech, where he was basically leading the computer vision group, which was one of his specialties, but now he has even a broader perspective. Beyond being head of the Danish Pioneer Center for AI, he's also, since last year, the president of the European Lab for Learning and Intelligent Systems, ALICE, one of the most successful, I think, and prestigious networks in Europe regarding those topics. And so I'm really happy that we have you, Serge, here as a speaker, talking about generative AI and some of the implications. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much for the introduction. So just want to check if the audio and screen share seems to be working so far.
Works well.
Great. So as you heard in the intro, I'll be talking about generative AI and magical thinking. So I'll start by giving a little bit of context about the project. So as Markus mentioned, I'm the director of the Danish Pioneer Center for AI. This is a consortium of 5 different universities' AI labs. So it's a kind of super lab across Denmark. It's supported by 5 different foundations. And the main focus of the Pioneer Center for AI is on different fundamental research areas of AI and machine learning. But we also set it up with an eye towards societal impact. And so for the purposes of this talk, I'm not going too much into detail about our 7 so-called collaboratories that focus on fundamental aspects of natural language processing, computer vision, machine learning, and so on. We have these 10 areas of societal impact that you see enumerated here. And our ambition over the 10 to 13 year life cycle of the Pioneer Center for AI is to raise a critical amount of funding for each of these areas of application so that they can become centers in their own right. And we were successful so far with one of them, which is in the public and social sector. So last year, we launched a new spin-off center called KAISA, the Center for AI in Society. So there you see the intersection of advanced methods in generative AI and its application in society, in the public and private sector. So the project I'll be talking about today falls under this new research center, KAISA, for which I also serve as a chief scientist. So this talk, as you see in the title, is about magical thinking. And it's actually about two types of magical thinking. And I'll be honest about this. In one category of the magical thinking, I'm pointing the finger. I'm pointing the finger at other people saying, you are engaged in magical thinking. And I'll go through that part. In the second part, I'm the one doing the magical thinking. And I'm also honest about that. But rather than calling it magical thinking when I'm doing it, I tend to think of it as aspirational or dreaming. So you're going to see different types of magical thinking here. So let's start with the first part. And for some of you, this is new. For some of you, this is a review. But we're in an age where we are surrounded by chatbots of various types. And it's perhaps not a surprise to hear that chatbots are not new. What you might not know is that going back even to the 60s, chatbots were fooling people into thinking that the chatbot was intelligent or sentient. And this was called the ELIZA effect, named after one of the first chatbots developed at MIT. By today's standards, it was a very rudimentary chatbot. It was written in Lisp, and it was very unsophisticated in the way it would respond. So you would type in things like you were talking to a therapist, and it would reply with things like, how did that make you feel? Or what did you do next? Or perhaps you should take a nap. And this resulted in people having the impression that it was somehow human-like in its behavior. And that was certainly a place in history where people started to use anthropomorphic terms to describe the system, like think, hallucinate. This has not been the case for other modalities yet. So highly realistic avatars of human faces, computer synthesized voices, and so forth, they don't quite have the same anthropomorphic impact that chatbots do. And AI researchers themselves are certainly partly to blame. And why is that? Well, for the years before generative AI really had a breakthrough with things like ChatGPT, we were very cavalier in terms of how we use terms like learning and training and hallucination and so forth, because none of it really worked that well. So what harm could there be in using terms like that? Well, times have changed, and these computers are increasingly convincing people that they are intelligent. And so there is a moral imperative, I would say, to try to demystify some of this technology and explain what's actually going on. So let's take a look at one of the architectures that was a big part of the current revolution in generative AI in the text domain. So that's the BERT masked language model from Google. And we'll look at this kind of approach in two domains. One is in a text type domain, and the other is in an image domain. But what I hope you'll take from this is that whether we're talking about text, music, amino acids, chord progressions, audio snippets, all of those different types of signals can be run through this type of architecture, but it all starts with a process called tokenization. So it's easiest to explain tokenization in the case of text. So what you see on the left in the BERT masked language model is a process where you have tokenized the sequences of letters. And for simplicity, the tokens are just the words themselves. And the mask, the so-called masking trick, consists of going through your very large corpus, your very large data set of text data, and walking through the tokens one by one and deleting them. And the task that an ever-growing neural net is then required to solve is to figure out which token you just erased. So if you have something like, how are blank doing today? then the neural net, whatever state-of-the-art large model you want to use to try to predict that thing that was missing, its task is to come up with a discrete token that when filled in is very probable for appearing there. Or if you were to say the first person to walk on the blank was Neil Armstrong, that blank is a place where there's a token that's missing, and you need to look, whatever this neural network is whose job it is to fill in that missing token, it's able to look at tokens to the left and the right of the thing that you just erased. That window in which you're allowed to look is called a context window. And context windows circa 2026 have grown to be extremely large, like volumes of encyclopedias. But the roots of this go back to simple concepts from Markov models and so forth, when the context models were quite small. But the spirit of it is that with enough tokens that are grabbed from any given domain, like text from Wikipedia, you can learn to fill in things that were missing. Now, that alone does not give rise to a chatbot. What it does is it gives rise to a representation. So what isn't shown here explicitly is that these tokens are not processed in their native form. The tokens come in, and inside this very large neural network, they get transformed into a high-dimensional vector, thousands of dimensions big. After which that vector goes through a sequence of linear algebraic operations, thresholding, and so forth. But the most important thing is that that token gets mapped into a high-dimensional vector. That high-dimensional vector is the representation. And a good representation is one on which you can do various kinds of operations that produce a useful assistant in the context of a chatbot. So again, this process of masking and filling in the thing that you masked, in a way, it builds the muscles of what will eventually become a chatbot assistant. So the special sauce is this kind of representation you learn that turns those tokens into something that is more amenable to computation. On the right, what you see is an example in the context of images. So in this case, the tokens are small patches of images. So here you take the input image, you chop it into these little tiles, and instead of zeroing out tokens that represent words, you zero out tokens that represent patches of pixels. That's one type of a masking operation. Other types are jigsaw, where you rearrange the order. There's another type of masking, which is where you add noise. There's one where you remove the chrominance channel, so it just becomes monochrome. So there's a number of these different types of tasks that you apply, and then you force, again, a very large neural network to fill back in the tokens that you removed. And from that process, you learn a high-dimensional representation. When you're done with this, you then develop an architecture which is called a next token prediction architecture. So you leverage the representation that has been extracted so that when a new sequence of tokens comes in, a so-called prompt that the person has typed into a chatbot, you can then take those tokens, turn them into a sequence of these high-dimensional representations, and on the fly determine which tokens are most likely to follow the sequence that you provided. Now, of course, I'm not talking about all the safety mechanisms, the alignment mechanisms, and so forth. There's a lot more to it. But that's the general idea. It's sort of a first step in terms of trying to demystify what is happening with these so-called next token prediction models. And when I say demystify, I don't mean it in a pejorative way. I'm not saying it is a bad thing. These are remarkable. When you have this many tokens captured from so much data from the internet, it is phenomenal what you are able to do just by virtue of predicting the next pixel. But we still need to ponder this question. What does it really mean about understanding that you can predict the next token? Another very popular model that you'll see, particularly in the context of image synthesis, is diffusion models, text-to-image diffusion models. Where what we saw in the last slide was called next token prediction. One way to think about diffusion models is that you are doing next noise prediction. This too is a type of masking. So in the context of diffusion models, you're making use of something behind the scenes, which is called a joint embedding model. So you've got words like dog, and you have lots of pictures of dogs. In this diffusion model, what you do is you take your images and you successively add small amounts of noise. And in this case, the neural net that you're training to do some task has the job of removing the noise that you just added. So previously, we talked about masking in terms of zeroing out a token, and the neural net's task is to fill back in the token that was missing. In diffusion models, it is next noise prediction. So you have a sequence of incremental noise that's added up to the point that this image of a dog is completely covered in noise, so you can't see it anymore. But the neural network operation that you learn is a denoising step. So when it's time to perform image synthesis, you start from complete noise and a text description, and you run these successive denoising processes in the backward direction so that you eventually land at an image that is best aligned with the text prompts that you provided. So it's the same kind of idea that the masking exercise, which in this case is addition of incremental amounts of noise, is designed to build the muscles of this very high capacity model so that it has increased fluency in terms of going back and forth between textual and visual representations. So these are two dominant paradigms these days, these next token prediction mechanisms and diffusion models. Now, here's where we run into a bit of a problem with some magical thinking, some of which is perhaps willful ignorance and some of it is not. So we are seeing the explosion of generative AI on the backdrop of very high profile social media platforms. So if you take a look at the example on the left, this is from an earlier version of ChatGPT that had visual functionality. And this is the so-called Chihuahua versus Blueberry Muffin example. So the task here, this is a kind of CAPTCHA, is simply to say for those 16 entries, which one is a dog and which one is a muffin. Now, if you are a researcher in machine learning, this should concern you because this particular CAPTCHA is all over the internet. It's not only the image that has been shared on subreddits and Quora and places like that, but the solutions and code to solve it. Now, in this particular case, an AI influencer shared that ChatGPT got it correct. So as an AI researcher, I look at this and say, wait, but did you separate your training from your testing set? Is this a proper experiment? But the climate that exists within the AI influencer communities is such that separating training and testing is simply not something that they're thinking about. But as researchers who are trying to pursue AI in a responsible way, we really do need to think about that proper scientific approach. So we should keep that in mind. Now, let's look at some of the concerns that people have. So in the workplace, people are justifiably worried that AI will take their job. And I think that that worry is going down a little bit as of the start of 2026 because the hype was perhaps unprecedented during 2025. But nonetheless, I think it's important for us to recognize that next token prediction methods, even with lots of safeguards around them, have a problem with confabulation, sometimes called hallucination. So I maintain that AI is a tool, and you're not going to lose your job to AI, but you may lose your job to someone who's trained in AI. The devil is in the details. In practice, in order to get LLMs to function, they need an assortment of tools and agents and so forth. Why is that? Well, LLMs, you have some sense of how they work now. They're very, very good at fluency, but they're not great at serving up facts and hard constraints and so forth. So if you look at some more examples, like on the left, you have a parking sign. The same AI influencer presented that example, and they said, this is really disruptive because I can just ask it, even though it looks quite complicated, is it okay for me to park here right now? And ChatGPT says, yes, you can park here for 1 hour starting at 4 p.m. And that post got a lot of likes, a lot of engagement. It turns out it was incorrect. And by the time people pointed out that it was wrong, it was too late because it had already made so much impact. But we should ask ourselves, what's the consequence of that? Who's responsible? What kind of deployment of this technology was justified based on this example, and who's going to answer for when it goes wrong? In a Danish context, there are apps. I'm sure that many other countries have similar things. These are for parents, teachers, and students to communicate on an app about homework, about upcoming events, and so forth. And you would think that AI-based chatbots would be able to look at that stream of information from these communication platforms and answer simple questions. What does my child need to bring to school tomorrow? What homework is due? When is the physical education class, etc. It turns out those types of things are very difficult, not because they're fundamental machine learning challenges, but because they are complicated in a societal context in terms of understanding what's important, where is the data, what are the authentication hurdles. So there's a lot of things going on when you actually try to use these chatbots in a specific cultural context. And that sort of thing isn't captured in this sort of breathless coverage of the generative AI revolution. I mentioned the word agents earlier, and I would encourage you, when you hear the word agent, just to use the word software. It's good old-fashioned software, not in a bad way, but in order to get access to the real potential and power of these generative AI systems, the LLM piece indeed makes it a very compelling user interface. It's very human-like and very fluent. However, when it comes to adhering to facts and adhering to guidelines and complying with legal codes and so forth, you need an assortment of agentic software in order to keep the LLM from getting you in trouble. So again, it's just software. And the systems that are popular now, the frontier models, the LLM part obviously is very important, but they are now festooned with all kinds of classic software engineering in order to make these things deliver on their potential. This is a pattern that we've seen before. And I'll admit that the generative AI hype wave is certainly a very big one on the historical timeline. And this writing is very small, so don't worry about reading the specifics here. But you see things, everything from the printing press to the semiconductor, the floppy disk, the personal computer, the first time pizzas could be ordered online. All of these things were the creation of the internet, Wi-Fi, the mobile web, the iPhone. These are transformative technologies, and the tech press can get a little bit hyperbolic at times in terms of sales. It becomes ordinary technology, not bad technology, but ordinary technology, like the internet or lasers. Clearly, those are incredible inventions and they changed everything, but they get woven into the fabric of history. One way of thinking about this is that when you remove the bullshit from all of the public discussion about AI, what you're left with is ordinary technology. So AI minus BS equals ordinary technology. Again, not a bad thing, but we will benefit from dispensing with the magical thinking, the snake oil salesman type talk, and say, what can we really do with this AI that we have access to? Okay, now that is the part where I was pointing the finger at others who engage in magical thinking. Now it's my turn to do the magical thinking. As you heard in the introduction, I'm from the US, and I relocated to Denmark, a small Nordic country, about 5 years ago. And I am a big fan of a lot of aspects of Nordic culture. And one thing about living in Denmark is that people are very active in associations, groups, um, uh, like clubs, social activities, and so forth. So it is a characteristic of life in Denmark that people belong to 5 or 6 different associations of some sort. Now, on the backdrop of this, Denmark, like probably every country in the world, is confronting this question of how to use AI in the public and private sector. So, probably everyone attending this talk is going to, whether they like it or not, is going to have to use some kind of citizen chatbot or something of that type in order to get access to public benefits, um, to the like the driver Department of Motor Vehicles and things like that. So there's also something tantalizing about this, that you could potentially take all the digitized information that public agencies have at desk anymore. So here we run into a kind of fear of missing out, a FOMO kind of race to the bottom. And the kind of thing that is a challenge here is that each of those public or private entities need to be the single source of truth. That means that those agencies make rules, and that could be which waste is picked up when garbage and recycling is picked up versus not picked up. It could be who gets benefits or who doesn't, who gets a refund on their rental car agreement and who doesn't. And in each of those cases, that is a so-called single source of truth. Whereas these large language models have a problem with improvising and running their mouth and things like that. So I hinted before that when you have that kind of confabulation, you need agents, you need structure that goes around these types of systems. So what happens when people use these kinds of chatbots is sometimes they get their questions answered, but in many, many cases, what happens when you're trying to get help from these systems is that something about the answer is unsatisfying. There's something where you think, well, for this problem I had with a rental car, or this problem I have where my kid is getting bullied, but the teachers aren't doing something about it, etc. All these kinds of things. It could be that you have a surgery coming up and you're on the healthcare website to find out what you're allowed to eat before the surgery. All of these things, maybe you get your question answered, but there's a good chance that there's more to be discussed. You want to talk to other people about it. When that happens, where do you go? Well, I would claim that that space, the kind of public clubhouse, the place where people get together to talk about these things, has been captured completely by a small number of corporations. In particular, Facebook groups are very, very popular in Denmark. In particular, I think they're popular in many places in the world as the place where people gather to talk about these things. So this brings us to a particular superpower that I hinted before that I think Denmark has and several other countries have. In Danish, this is andelsbevægelse, and you can think of this as collective action, cooperative movement. It's simply an aspect of the culture in which people get together in organizations and they help each other. So it's perhaps not a surprise that Facebook groups are as popular as they are. It's a huge amount of people organizing into groups with administrators and people answering all kinds of questions. And so they're essentially helping one another to solve problems. Now, this, I would say, is a win-win situation in the sense that public and private entities that are trying to cut down on their budget for customer service employees, front desk employees, and so forth, if they're able to cultivate a fruitful environment where these associations are well informed and have access to tools to help themselves and help one another, then everybody benefits from that. Now, one of the other benefits that Denmark has, which does not sound very fancy in the context of generative AI, is a national single sign-on. And in Denmark, it's called MitID. So this is linked to something like a social security number. So everybody in Denmark has access to this. Now, this combination of a cultural phenomenon around associations and a single sign-on means that there is a massive opportunity to put together the idea of social discussion forums and AI as an ordinary technology that is fueling the potential among these discussion forums. Remember, the context here is that someone entered this AI system through a standard chatbot to try to get an answer to a question. They find themselves needing input from a broader community, something distinct from the particular entity where they were asking the question, the rental car company, the benefits administration. And so when they're in that social community, this is an opportunity to get help from people and to get help from AI working together. Now, this, I'm sorry, just one moment, okay? Okay, sorry, my kids were getting a little bit rowdy and I had to just tell them to calm down. So this brings us to a particular project which we are running through CAISA, the center I mentioned at the beginning, the Center for AI and Society. The code name for the project is Advatar, and this is a portmanteau of advocate avatar. And this is a model for for AI-mediated communication. It consists of two parts, which in Danish, it's mit AI and vores AI. So this corresponds to my AI and our AI. The my AI part, I would say, is somewhat conventional in the sense that it represents the citizen chatbot that provides a baseline level of did I lose the connection?
No, it's fine.
No, okay. Mit AI provides the baseline level of chatbot functionality where you can ask general questions. So a resident or a citizen in Denmark can log in with their MitID, get access to a general chatbot, ask it questions about anything, and that chatbot has access to public-facing information that's available on all of these different websites that have already been digitalized. When that's the case, as I mentioned before, like with plastic waste pickup, you simply get your answer and you're done. There is no need to engage in anything like a Facebook group or talk in a discussion forum. When you need to escalate the problem, so you're logged into your MitAE, you've got access to all of your private information that's linked to your social security number and so forth, your transit history, your health history, things like that. And now it's time to escalate and get some additional input from other people that are in different affinity networks. That's where through CAISA, we've developed this platform called vores AI. So that's the Our AI platform. In that context, you can think of it in the sense that if there is a Facebook group for it, such as recent law school graduates looking for jobs, people with elderly parents experiencing dementia, parents of kids who want to become pro football players, asylum-related questions, etc. All of those things indicated at the bottom of this plot, of this slide, indicate ways that people might want to engage with members of their community to help get questions answered. Now, there's a little guitar logo there with a red X over it. So what do I mean by that? What that represents is that this MIT AE, Voice AE thing, this avatar project, this is not an attempt on my part to say everybody should quit Facebook or everybody should quit Instagram. There are all kinds of groups of which people are members that are things like an Eddie Van Halen guitar fan group. It could be people who like knitting, all sorts of things where you're a member of these groups. And in many cases, those groups are international. And that's completely fine. So in this avatar framework, we're not looking to recapture every single Facebook group. We're not looking to recapture the doom scrolling, the dopamine hit aspects of Facebook or other social media. Essentially, I'm saying leave that alone. But in a national context, where you have, in Denmark's case, tens of thousands of these Facebook groups that are nationally facing, that involve day-to-day life of citizens in a way that's all the links are inward within Denmark. They're not based on dopamine or doom scrolling. They're just functional. They're things that people need to do in their day-to-day work and life. Those are the things represented with these links going to Voice AE. So that's a situation where many of those institutions, as I hinted before, are under pressure to cut down on their staff. So they're looking to lay off people and try to get more powerful AI. And originally, a lot of these efforts were just focused on what we're calling the MIT AE part, the My AI part that should answer as many questions as possible. But it's just a fact, particularly due to the power imbalance between individual citizens and large institutions, that people need places to gather, a kind of common house, a clubhouse, a place to get together and talk about these topics and work out answers. This won't be the single source of truth. As I indicated before, the single source of truth sits with the institutions, the Public Benefits Administration, the Department of Motor Vehicles, things like that. At the end of the day, whatever site they maintain, whatever documentation they have digitized, that is the final word. But as any of you know that are members of these various Facebook groups, a lot of helpful advice, and sometimes not so helpful advice, can be discussed within these Facebook groups. And people can get more informed and then go back to the institutions to get to make some progress. Now, in order to operationalize this within Kaisa, we built a prototype on an open source platform called discourse.org, not to be confused with Discord. So if you're not familiar already, I highly recommend taking a look at discourse.org. It's essentially a clone of Facebook groups, so it provides discussion forum functionality. It's extremely well implemented. It's been adopted by many different public and private institutions. And importantly, it has provisions for generative AI built right in. So they don't have their own discourse.org AI. What they have is provisions where you can enter an API key for Gemini or for Claude or OpenAI. And then each group can have one or more bots that are members of the group. The vision within Avatar is that that member of a group is like a reference librarian. It essentially hangs out in the group, monitoring discussions, looking for duplicate questions, helping when it can. It doesn't run the show, but it assists the people who run what in the past would have been a Facebook group. And discourse.org simply makes it easy to do this. So the idea here in terms of the overall ecosystem is that as a user in Denmark, in this case, and hopefully eventually in the Nordics, and then as the digital wallet rolls out across Europe, this kind of thing could be possible throughout all of Europe. The idea is that the MIT AI thing is your first line of defense. There's something you need, health related, physical therapy, whatever it is, a dentist appointment, you start with your My AI. And if you can get what you need to do, if you can navigate through all your digital resources with that, fantastic. But if you can't, when engaging with these different public or private sector entities shown here, your chatbot will tell you, I'm not able to answer the question that you have, but I see that you're a member of such and such association. Would you mind if I pass along the question to that association? In which case, it would fire up this discourse.org link that I showed before, which will be reskinned for whatever association is organizing it. At which point you could anonymously or publicly post your question. You could DM directly with the bot that serves as the reference librarian for that association, or a hybrid. You can make the post and you could have the bot be the first to comment on it, and then other people that are in that forum chime in with their own updates. And of course, on a regular basis, that bot can monitor what's going on and update itself. Now, one thing, one of many elephants in the room is that I'm being a bit cavalier about just how much compute this involves, because I'm talking about tens of thousands of Facebook groups, everybody having access to a citizen chatbot, and then a whole bunch of special purpose Gen AI models that with a cadence of weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, I'm not sure yet, all of these different groups are at least going to have to fine tune their models on all sorts of new data that's coming in. Tax policies, investor reports, whatever it is that form the basis of these different groups, there's a whole lot of compute that's going to be necessary to keep these models fresh. Well, toward that end, Denmark is very proud to have a supercomputer, which is called Gefjon. It's based on NVIDIA technology. It's got 1,500 H100s. And this emboldens our effort, where we can say this vision for Avatar, this kind of service that one day could be used by 5+ million people, is something that actually is very doable in a sovereign way. We have the technology within Denmark to do this. And I see similar patterns across Europe as different regions are developing their supercomputer power for these types of Gen AI functionality. So to recap what's going on with Avatar, this, as I mentioned earlier, is not a project of the Pioneer Center for AI. It's a project within CAISA. It's the Center for AI and Society. The things that are needed here from machine learning and AI are not rocket science. They aren't the absolute cutting edge of what's going on with generative AI. It's things that might have been fully functional 2 years ago. For what really is compelling as a possibility in the context of Avatar and this specific realization with MIT AI and Voice AI is what is possible if, and this is the big wishful thinking on my part, if people in Denmark who are members of these groups or run these groups were to move from Facebook groups, from subreddits, from Quora and things like that, if they were to move to this platform, all of the technology is already there. So this so-called tech stack is ready. There are still research aspects to it, but it is not bleeding edge. Then, in terms of the human stack, these Danish words here represent roles that exist in associations that are very well defined. these aren't new either. Now, of course, I'm oversimplifying a bit. I warned you, this is some magical thinking, but all the pieces are in place if people are willing to take the jump. If they're willing to leave the Facebook groups, move to a kind of clone platform that's sovereign, that has Gen AI functionality built in, that has a supercomputer backend that's able to keep the data fresh and the models fresh. There are huge opportunities in terms of people being able to help one another, to help themselves, and essentially realize the opportunity of going from the first wave of digitalization, which was HTML pages, PDF, things like that, to this AI-fueled sequel of digitalization where the chatbots are availing themselves of all of this public information to help people. So with that, I will conclude. I just have a few links here about both Pioneer Center for AI and Kaisa. And we're both centers are really set up to engage with the general public. And we have all kinds of seminars and summer schools. And we had a big role in running Eurips last month, which was the European version of NeurIPS. And you can check us out on social media and so forth. And that is it. With that, I would just like to thank you for your attention and see if there are any questions.
Yes, thanks a lot for this very nice and thought-provoking talk on several aspects. So usually we will get some questions via the chat, but I can also start while they're coming in. Yeah, so very interesting. So you basically mentioned this is all ordinary technology several times. And let me ask, maybe in a sense, so what would be the non-ordinary technology? Or basically, one could ask the question, for example, or some people also say that these kind of generative AI models can start to develop kind of self-referentially and change on their own. I think Joshua Benjo is also making the point sometimes. So do you think that this is a potential pathway that one has to be careful about, or which would be the non-ordinary, or what do you think, or when would you say something is non-ordinary, or where to make the distinction?
Yeah, so I think one way to characterize something that would be extraordinary or godlike is if you were to train this thing that's called MIT AI here, and it just answered everything and did everything. Whatever it is as a citizen whatever inquiry you have, you type it in, it asks you some questions, and that's it. You get the answer. There is no need to escalate. There is no deliberation. There is no reflection among a social group. And on purpose, as I describe this, I hope you realize it doesn't even make sense because we aren't machines. We need deliberation. We need to discuss stuff, even in cases where we know, like with the rental car thing, we were wrong. We just don't want to pay the fee and we want to talk about it, right? So I can't really conceive of what extraordinary technology would be in that setting, in the sense that what I think in the context of AI in society, I'm not saying this I'm not talking about nuclear plasma containment, I'm talking about AI in society. I believe the appropriate role for AI is to assist individuals or groups to do what they want to do. Not what the AI is a black box, but there are centuries-old systems and institutions that allow democracy to function, for people to reach decisions together. That, I think, is extraordinary. That's something that humanity can be proud of. And the AI is remarkable in terms of its memory, to some extent, the reasoning ability, deduplication, the reference librarian type stuff. So it's a bit circular in the sense that the way I'm pitching it is ordinary by construction.
Mm.
But I can't really think of how in the AI and society setting you could make the AI extraordinary without simply changing everything about how society functions.
Mhm. So you basically stress that it's really a tool, basically that can be used and should be used. Thanks. So waiting for questions potentially. Then maybe another one. I wondered about this avatar thing that you avatar thing that you also show here. You had these different aspects, and I think you had privacy in there too. And I was wondering, you said, well, it's all kind of solved already, but maybe it's if you have kind of this emergent system between basically the people, the information, and let's say the generative models, couldn't it be that it's much more difficult to control the privacy? I mean, I'm not an expert in that. It's just, or I have no idea. So, but I wonder if it could be that it's harder to ensure privacy. And I guess, for example, I know that in Denmark, northern countries, actually privacy is not such a big thing, and which is probably good. I mean, a lot of things are very transparent. In Germany, it's a very, very big thing. So we are always concerned about these things. So I wonder about that, how you would see that.
No, it's a good point. I think it's not an accident that this idea is sprouting on this backdrop of collective action and the Nordic traditions of collectives. And, this goes back to grain collectives and dairy collectives and housing. I mean, Denmark and Norway and so on are famous for these types of things. It doesn't work everywhere. I mean, there are many settings in which you could provide the stack, so to speak, and the thing just won't work. And so I'm not heavy-handed about this. It's one thing to say that differential privacy can help, or provisions for posting privately, or complete privacy or privacy, but the admins of the group see who you are, etc. There's so many ways to slice and dice the way that the privacy functions. The thing that I want to emphasize is that right now, because these discussions overwhelmingly happen on Meta or Facebook platforms, the general attitude of Danes is that of resignation, which is to say they don't particularly want to use Facebook, but it's the only thing they have access to. And they know that, quote unquote, Mark Zuckerberg can see all their data, and they somehow talk about incredibly private and personal things on these groups. And the resignation that I'm referring to is where they basically say, well, Denmark's a small country. Why would Facebook really care? Right? So it's kind of the devil they know versus the devil they don't. And if something goes wrong on the Facebook group or someone gets kicked out incorrectly, they can blame Zuckerberg. For this avatar thing to take off, suddenly we own it. There's no one else to complain about. And so Denmark, as I'm sure is the case in Germany, is filled with researchers who know about cybersecurity, differential privacy, federated learning, like all of the theory. They've done research on it. It's always been against the grain because you have to scrape the data from Facebook and scrape it from Twitter and stuff because you have to fight the power, right? But this is a system where, in principle, if you didn't trust the government, they could just peek at every one of the 40,000 groups and figure out how people are going to vote, or essentially abuse it in thousands of ways. So this kind of system could just be dead on arrival if people say, I don't believe in federated learning. I don't believe that the authentication system works or whatever. So I prefaced it by saying I've got magical thinking here, but come on, like we gotta believe in something, right?
Yes, thanks. So we have some questions from the audience. I think you can also read them, but I read them out for everyone else. So Paul Jensen is asking a question now. First, he commends you for a very clear, nice talk. And he says, you talked about a Facebook clone in the voice AI environment. And he asked, what do you mean with a Facebook clone? And he asked, what is the general goal? Is it an alternative for existing platforms? So you alluded to that already, but probably you can extend.
I'm glad I have a chance to clear it up. It's actually not a clone of all of Facebook. It is only a clone. And furthermore, in terms of the scope of the Avatar project, I only have my eye on the groups that are utilitarian in nature. So by clone, I mean it has provisions for posting with photos, events, with administrative privileges, with moderation, etc. So all of the things that a Facebook group has, discourse.org has it. But it also has provisions for bot members of the groups. So in theory, if Meta were to sense a threat coming from Europe that large populations are going to quit using Facebook groups, Facebook could kill this entire thing simply by allowing these bots to join their groups and have some kind of coordination with different countries through, something like what I've described. And that would make me die a little inside because I love this project and I'd like to see it see the light of day. But it would, in the big picture, be a success because Facebook already has the AI. They could do it in 10 minutes if they wanted to. But there are many, many geopolitical reasons why that would not occur.
Yeah, thanks. Another question, more technical, more details from Maurice L. He's asking, do you create the Meet AI and the Voice AI as large language models, and which kind of LLMs would you then use, public or private LLMs? And he further asks, how do you tell the LLM to go and consult an external source?
Yeah. So in practice, at a national scale, because we're collaborating with the Ministry of Digitalization, and they have very strict requirements on sovereignty, the model that will constitute MIT AI when you log in and you get this chatbot, it will, for example, be Mistral. I mean, preferably it would be a Danish model, but at least something from another European country. So some version of Mistral that is fine-tuned in the Danish setting. So chances are and this is all a research project. This is live, hot off the presses. But most likely the baseline chatbot that every citizen will get will be something like Mistral. Voice AI is a different story because it has manifestations in the public and private sector. Public sector entities probably will be bound by the same sovereign requirements. The private sector will not. In that case, it is only a question of compliance with the Avatar guidelines, GDPR, all sorts of data privacy, regional requirements, whatever. So what I envision in that setting is that if a private entity wants to join the Voice AI network, they can do so with an OpenAI API, with Gemma, with Gemini, whatever they want, provided it is compliant with this Avatar set of guidelines.
Great. So I think we are almost at 5 p.m. So with this, I basically really would like to thank you again for this very great, inspiring talk. And I think one can still gather after the talk in the neural network and discuss things. Otherwise, I'm giving back to the main organizers, AI for Good. Thanks again, Serge.
Great. Thank you so much for the invitation. Bye.
Thank you for participating in today's AI for Good session. We hope you've learnt something new, innovative, and engaging in today's event. We now encourage you to continue the conversation on the live video wall in the neural network. Here you can ask questions, like and comment, share links, complete the poll, connect with interesting profiles, or speak one-on-one using the chat and video function. We invite you to explore the lobby, try the smart matching quiz, visit the virtual exhibits, poster boards, the e-shop, and build your personalized AI for Good program. Let's shape the future of AI for good.